Hello, friend. Welcome to Science for Sleep. Whether you have returned tonight or are discovering this channel for the first time, this is a quiet place to slow down, learn something gentle, and allow the day to gradually fade. Dusk has settled over a wooded stream. Near the bank, a young tree ends in a pale, pointed stump. Fresh chips rest among the leaves, and the exposed wood is marked by dozens of narrow cuts. A moment later, rings spread across the dark surface of the water. At first, there is only a rounded head, a pair of small ears, and a branch moving steadily through the pond. Then the animal turns, and a wide, flat tail briefly rises behind it. This is the familiar beaver. Most people recognize it by a few clear signs. There are the orange front teeth, the heavy branches, the mud-covered lodge, and the dam stretched across the stream. These features are often presented as separate curiosities, as though the beaver simply collects wood and builds because building is what beavers do. But every part of this scene belongs to one connected survival system. The tree, the branch, the deep pond, and the hidden entrance beneath the water all solve practical problems. The beaver is creating a place where it can feed, travel, shelter, and escape with less danger. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, you're welcome to subscribe. And if it feels natural, to leave a comment sharing where you're listening from tonight. It helps others find this calm corner of science, one sleepy listener at a time. The first important detail is that the dam is not the beaver's house. The house is usually called a lodge. It may appear as a rounded mound of sticks and mud standing in the pond, or it may be built partly into a riverbank. Inside is a dry chamber where the family rests, grooms its fur, raises its young, and shelters during winter. The entrance is usually below the surface. The dam is a separate structure. Its main job is to slow flowing water and raise the depth of the pond around the lodge. That deeper water protects the underwater entrance from many land predators. It also gives a beaver a quick escape route when it is feeding near shore. On land, a beaver carries a heavy body on relatively short legs. It can walk and climb over fallen wood, but it is far more secure once it reaches water. A deeper pond shortens the distance the animal must cross on open ground. It also makes moving branches easier. A thick limb that is difficult to drag through grass can be floated across the pond with much less effort. During cold winters, deep water can preserve access between the lodge and branches stored beneath the ice. Damming therefore solves several problems at once. It creates protected entrances, safer travel, easier transportation, and a stable body of water that can remain useful through changing weather. Not every beaver needs to build a dam. Some occupy large lakes where the water is already deep and steady. Others dig shelters into the banks of broad rivers that cannot easily be blocked. Building begins when changing a smaller stream will produce safer water than the beaver could find there naturally. There are only two living beaver species. The North American beaver is known scientifically as Castor canadensis. It is found across much of Canada and the United States, with populations also extending into northern Mexico. The Eurasian beaver is Castor fiber. Its natural range stretches across parts of Europe and Asia, where centuries of hunting once reduced it to a small number of scattered populations. The two species look very similar from a distance. Both have dense brown fur, webbed hind feet, broad tails, and large incisors adapted for cutting vegetation. They are separate species, however, with genetic and anatomical differences that reflect their long histories on opposite sides of the Northern Hemisphere. The North American beaver is the largest rodent native to North America. An adult commonly weighs between 35 and 70 pounds. Including the tail, its body is often between 3 and 4 feet long. Exceptionally large individuals can exceed the common weight range, especially where food is abundant and winters are survivable. Despite that size, a beaver can become difficult to see as soon as it enters still water. Its eyes, ears, and nostrils remain close to the surface, while most of the body stays hidden below. A soft wake may be the only sign that an animal weighing as much as a large dog is passing through the pond. The beaver does not begin by trying to reshape an ecosystem. It begins with immediate needs. It needs water deep enough to hide an entrance. It needs a safe route back from the trees. It needs a way to move food and building material without carrying everything over land. Yet once those needs are met through construction, the consequences spread beyond the lodge. Water slows, sediment settles, banks become wetter, plants change, and new animals begin using the habitat. A single family seeking security can gradually alter the direction, depth, and timing of water across a much larger area. Before any of that can happen, the beaver needs a body capable of working in forest soil, cold air, deep mud, and dark water, without belonging completely to only one of those places. The moment the beaver slips below the surface, several parts of its body begin working together. Small valves close the nostrils and ear openings, keeping water from entering while the animal swims. A clear layer slides across each eye. This is the nictitating membrane, sometimes called a third eyelid. It protects the eye from floating grit and plant fragments, while still allowing the beaver to see underwater. The view is not perfectly sharp, especially in dark or muddy water, but it is clear enough to follow a submerged branch or locate the entrance to a lodge. The mouth has its own seal, loose folds of skin close behind the four front teeth. This allows the incisors to remain outside the closed mouth, while the throat and the rest of the mouth stay protected from water. A beaver can therefore bite through a submerged branch without swallowing a stream along with it. Movement comes mainly from the hind end of the body. The rear feet are large and webbed, with skin stretched between the toes. During each kick, that broad surface pushes against the water and drives the animal forward. The front paws remain much smaller. They are shaped more like hands and are used for detailed work. A beaver can grip a twig, turn a piece of bark, carry mud, or pull loose plants from the pond bottom. Those paws also pass over the fur during grooming. Beaver fur contains two main layers. Longer guard hairs cover a dense layer of soft underfur close to the skin. Air becomes trapped among those fine hairs, creating insulation that slows the movement of heat from the warm body into cold water. Water removes heat much faster than air at the same temperature, so this trapped layer is especially important during winter. Grooming helps maintain it. The beaver spreads oily secretions through the coat and arranges the hairs so water has difficulty reaching the skin. A poorly maintained coat would lose much of its insulating power. The familiar tail adds several kinds of control. It is broad, flat, and covered with scales rather than thick fur. While swimming, the tail can help steer and stabilize the body, as the hind feet provide most of the thrust. A turn of the tail can help guide the beaver through a narrow lodge entrance or around a submerged log. On land, it can support the animal as it sits upright to cut a branch. Fat stored within the tail also provides an energy reserve, especially during winter when fresh food becomes harder to reach. A sudden tail slap against the pond surface produces a loud warning. The sound can travel across the water and alert nearby family members before the animal dives. That slap is one reason the tail is sometimes imagined as a general-purpose building tool. Beavers do not normally use it like a shovel or a trowel. Mud is gathered and pressed into dams and lodges with the front paws. The tail contributes balance while the animal works, but the detailed placement is done by the hands. Underwater, all these features allow a beaver to remain active for several minutes at a time. Ordinary trips beneath the surface are usually much shorter than the longest reported dives. Maximum submersion times are often given as roughly 15 minutes, especially when the animal is resting or moving slowly. A working beaver commonly returns sooner because cutting, carrying, and swimming use oxygen more quickly. Its heart rate can slow during a dive, helping conserve oxygen for organs that need it most. Stored oxygen in the blood and muscles also supports these brief periods below the surface. The same body appears less secure once it climbs onto land. Short legs and a heavy frame make movement slower away from water. A beaver can walk through brush and cross open ground, but carrying a large branch over soil requires far more effort than floating it. Predators can also approach from more directions. The pond therefore serves as both a workplace and an escape route. Every closing valve, layer of fur, webbed foot, and careful movement helps the animal cross the boundary between land and water. The clearest marks it leaves behind come from 4 structures at the front of the mouth, growing through every season and renewing the cutting edges that open the forest one bite at a time. At the edge of the pond, the pointed stump still holds a record of the cutting. Each pale groove marks the path of an incisor through bark, cambium, and wood. The cuts overlap until the trunk narrows into a rough cone. A small tree may fall after a short period of work, while a thick trunk can require repeated visits over several nights. Every bite presses plant fibers against 4 front teeth that must remain sharp despite constant abrasion. Beaver incisors grow continuously throughout the animal's life. New tooth material forms near the root and slowly pushes the older portion forward. This steady growth replaces the surface lost during feeding, construction, and the daily contact between the upper and lower teeth. Without that renewal, years of cutting bark and wood would gradually reduce the incisors to worn stubs. The visible tooth has a layered structure. Its front surface is covered by a thick layer of enamel, the hardest material produced by a mammal's body. Behind that enamel lies dentin, a softer tissue that forms most of the tooth. The two materials wear at different speeds. As the beaver bites and grinds its teeth together, the softer dentin recedes more quickly than the enamel along the front. A beveled edge remains, much like the sloping edge of a chisel. The tooth therefore sharpens through the same contact that wears it down. Studies of biological cutting tools have shown that hardness alone does not fully explain this process. Different regions of enamel can wear at different rates, even when laboratory tests find similar levels of hardness. Microscopic structure also matters. The direction of mineral crystals, the way tiny cracks spread, and the support provided by deeper tooth layers all affect which parts are removed first. This gives the incisor a controlled pattern of wear rather than a flat, rounded surface. The upper and lower incisors also meet when the jaw closes. Their edges slide against one another, removing small amounts of material and helping preserve the cutting shape. A beaver may appear to be chewing while resting, though some of this movement maintains the tools needed for later work. The jaw muscles provide the force behind each cut. Large muscles along the sides of the skull pull the lower jaw upward and forward. That force becomes concentrated along a narrow edge at the tip of each incisor. Pressure increases when the same force is applied over a smaller area, allowing the teeth to crush bark and split plant fibers. The orange-brown front surface has often been explained as a simple stain produced by iron. The actual structure is more detailed. Beaver enamel contains an outer region enriched with iron. This mineral-rich layer helps the tooth resist acid and mechanical wear, both useful qualities for an animal that spends years cutting damp vegetation. Iron is part of the explanation for the enamel's strength, though recent research at the nanoscale has refined the explanation for its color. Nanoscale means a level so small that individual structures are measured in billionths of a meter. At that scale, researchers can examine thin surface layers and the arrangement of mineral crystals within the enamel. The orange-brown appearance depends partly on a very thin material at the surface and on the way light travels through the iron-rich enamel below it. Light can be absorbed, scattered, or reflected differently as it passes through these layers. The color therefore emerges from chemistry and structure working together. This outer enamel protects the front of the tooth, while the softer rear surface continues to wear away. Growth adds new material from below. Grinding removes older material at the exposed edge. The balance between those processes allows an adult beaver to keep cutting throughout its life. The pointed stump beside the water now shows more than the presence of an animal. It records repeated jaw movements, controlled wear, mineral-rich enamel, and tooth growth that continued while the tree was being opened. Once the bark is broken, the beaver gains access to several different resources. Some parts of the tree can be eaten. Other pieces may strengthen a dam or lodge. A branch may also be carried into deep water and stored near the family's winter shelter. The teeth explain how the tree is opened. The tissues beneath the bark explain why the beaver begins cutting in the first place. Beneath the freshly opened bark lies a pale, moist layer that offers far more food than the hard center of the branch. This thin living tissue is called cambium. It forms new wood toward the inside of the tree and new bark toward the outside. Cambium contains sugars and other nutrients that are easier to use than the dense heartwood at the center of a trunk. A beaver often strips away the outer bark and scrapes this softer layer with its front teeth. Young twigs may be eaten almost completely because their bark is thin and their tissues remain tender. Thicker branches leave behind a solid core after the edible surface has been removed. That remaining wood can still serve several purposes. A straight limb may be carried toward a dam. A shorter piece may strengthen the wall of a lodge. Other branches may be pushed beneath the pond and saved for winter. The same tree can therefore provide food, shelter material, and a useful object for changing the flow of water. Plant choice varies from one region to another. Willows grow quickly along wet banks and often form flexible stems that are easy to cut and carry. Aspen, cottonwood, poplar, and birch are also commonly used where they are available. A beaver living beside a boreal stream in northern Canada may rely heavily on willow and aspen. One occupying a warmer wetland farther south may have access to a wider range of shrubs, roots, and aquatic plants. During spring and summer, the diet often becomes softer and more varied. Leaves and fresh buds supply nutrients while plant growth is active. Grasses may be clipped close to shore. Water lilies provide leaves, stems, and underground parts. Cattails and other pond vegetation can be pulled from shallow water with the front paws. The exact menu depends on what grows close enough to reach without a long trip over land. Wood remains difficult food even after the outer bark has been removed. Plant cell walls contain cellulose and related materials that resist ordinary digestion. Lignocellulose is the name for the tough mixture that gives stems and branches much of their strength. A beaver's own digestive enzymes cannot fully break this material apart. Much of the work is carried out by microbes living farther along the digestive tract. Beavers are hindgut fermenters. Food passes through the stomach and small intestine before reaching an enlarged pouch called the cecum. The cecum sits near the beginning of the large intestine. Inside it live communities of bacteria and archaea. Archaea are microscopic organisms that resemble bacteria in size, but belong to a separate branch of life. These microbes produce enzymes that attack parts of the plant cell wall. Fermentation then converts some of the broken plant material into smaller compounds, including fatty acids that can pass through the intestinal wall and enter the beaver's bloodstream. Those compounds provide usable energy from food that would otherwise travel through the body, with much of its value still locked inside. The process has clear limits. A classic digestion study estimated that beavers broke down about 30% of the cellulose in the tested diet. The exact amount changes with food type, season, and the condition of the animal. That result still shows how microbial fermentation turns a difficult resource into a practical one without making wood completely digestible. The harder center of a thick trunk contributes less direct nutrition than the growing tissues near its surface. Cutting a large tree may still be worthwhile because it brings many smaller branches within reach. One fallen aspen can provide bark, buds, and twigs, while also producing material large enough for construction. Season gradually changes the value of every part. Fresh leaves disappear as autumn advances. Aquatic plants die back or become covered by ice. Woody stems remain standing, but reaching them becomes harder once snow deepens and the pond begins to freeze. A northern beaver may still be surrounded by food in January, while the safest routes to that food have vanished. Preparation must begin while the branches remain easy to cut. The shore is still open, and the water can carry each load toward a storage place below the future ice. By early autumn, the green edges of the pond begin to thin. Night temperatures fall, insects become less active, and the soft growth of summer starts to fade. Along northern waterways, this seasonal change sends beavers into a period of steady food gathering. A willow stem is cut near the bank and pulled into the water. The branch moves toward the lodge, though it is neither eaten immediately nor pressed into a wall. It joins a growing pile beneath the surface. This underwater store is often called a food cache. In cold regions, a beaver family may spend weeks building it before the pond freezes. Branches from willow, aspen, birch, or poplar are collected while the shoreline remains easy to reach. The thicker ends may be pushed into soft mud on the pond bottom. Other pieces are placed across them, adding weight and helping hold the pile beneath the surface. The result can appear untidy from above. A few twigs may rise into the air, while most of the structure spreads underwater beside the lodge. Its arrangement follows a practical pattern. Heavy wood keeps the cache anchored. Smaller branches remain easier to pull free. The bark, buds, and thin twigs provide much of the edible material. Cold water also slows drying and decay, helping the stored food remain usable longer than branches left exposed on land. Beavers do not hibernate. Their activity decreases during harsh weather, though they continue feeding, grooming, maintaining the lodge, and moving through the water beneath the ice. By midwinter, the pond surface may be sealed beneath a thick frozen layer. Snow can cover the shoreline and hide familiar trails. Inside the lodge, the living chamber remains above water level. A beaver slips down through the submerged entrance and enters the dark pond below. It can swim directly toward the cache without breaking through the ice. The distance is usually kept short because every underwater trip uses stored oxygen. A branch is pulled loose and carried back toward the lodge. Thin bark may be eaten inside, leaving a stripped stick that can later become part of the shelter or another structure. The pond serves several purposes during this journey. It stores the branches close to the family. It supports their weight during transport. The surrounding water also hides the beavers from most predators, while open land remains buried under snow. The system depends on a fairly stable water level. A cache placed too close to the surface may freeze into the ice. Falling water can leave stored branches trapped above the new pond level. Either change can place food only a few feet away, while making it difficult to reach safely. Dam maintenance continues into the cold season, partly because the depth around the lodge and cache must remain dependable. Body fat helps during periods when feeding becomes difficult. The broad tail contains stored fat that can supply energy during winter. Other reserves are carried around the body. These stores support the animal through short shortages and the extra energy needed to stay warm. They cannot feed a colony for an entire northern winter, so the underwater branches remain essential. Climate changes the size and importance of the cache. In parts of California or the southern United States, open water and fresh vegetation may remain available through much of the year. Beavers living there may collect food as needed, rather than constructing the large winter stores seen in colder parts of Canada and Alaska. Even within one region, a mild river may stay open, while a shallow pond nearby freezes for months. The colony adjusts its work to the conditions around its own home. Several animals depend on the stored pile. An adult pair may share the lodge with young born that spring, and older offspring from the previous year. Each body draws food from the same limited supply. Each leak in the dam can threaten the same underwater route. What appears from the shore to be the work of one quiet animal is usually maintained by a family living through the seasons together. Inside the lodge, the winter food supply supports several generations at once. A typical colony contains an adult pair, the kits born during the current year, and older young that have remained from the previous year. This usually creates a household of 5 or 6 beavers, though family size changes with litter size, survival, and the age at which older offspring leave. North American beavers commonly produce between 2 and 4 kits in a litter. Larger litters sometimes occur. Mating often takes place during winter, when the pond may still be covered with ice. After a pregnancy lasting a little over 3 months, the female usually gives birth in late spring or early summer. The timing places the kit's first months during the warmest and most productive part of the year. Newborn kits arrive covered in fur, with their eyes open and their front teeth already visible. They can move around the lodge soon after birth. Within a short time, they may enter shallow water under the close attention of older family members. Their fur provides insulation, but their small bodies lose heat more quickly than those of adults. Early trips are therefore brief. The skills needed for life in the pond develop gradually. A young kit must learn how to control its webbed hind feet, steer through narrow underwater entrances, and return to the surface before its oxygen supply runs low. Diving ability improves as the lungs, muscles, and swimming movements develop. Food also changes during these first months. Kits begin by drinking milk from their mother. They soon sample leaves and soft shoots brought into the lodge. Later, they start scraping bark and handling thin twigs with their front paws. Older siblings can affect this learning simply by performing the same tasks nearby. A young beaver watches branches being carried through the water and encounters the same roots night after night. Repeated exposure turns the pond into a familiar map of entrances, food sites, canals, and safe resting places. By their second year, young beavers can contribute meaningful work. They may help gather branches for the autumn cache or press mud into a damaged lodge wall. Dam repairs often involve several family members visiting the same area at different times, rather than working in a tightly organized group. One animal adds a stick. Another arrives later with mud or vegetation. The structure is maintained through many small actions spread across the night. Grooming also has a social role. Beavers clean their own coats, though family members may groom places that are difficult for one animal to reach. This helps preserve the insulating layer of air within the fur and may also reinforce familiarity among animals sharing the lodge. A stable family reduces the amount of work any one beaver must complete alone. Several bodies gather food from the same territory. Maintenance continues while another animal feeds or rests. Young beavers gain experience within water already made safe by earlier construction. The same territory must also be protected from outsiders. Near shore, a beaver may scrape together mud, leaves, and small pieces of vegetation to form a low scent mound. Chemical secretions are placed on top. One of these substances is castoreum, produced in paired sacs near the base of the tail. Its smell carries information about the animal that left it. Researchers have tested how beavers respond to familiar and unfamiliar scent. In one experiment involving 39 Eurasian beaver families, animals spent longer examining scent from strangers than scent associated with known neighbors. They also showed stronger aggressive responses to unfamiliar castoreum. This suggests that a scent mark can identify the level of territorial risk. A known neighbor may remain near an established boundary without attempting to take over the lodge or food supply. A stranger brings greater uncertainty. Chemical recognition allows beavers to gather information before entering a physical confrontation, reducing some of the danger that direct fighting would create. Family membership does not continue forever. Young commonly remain with their parents for roughly 2 years. As a new litter grows and pressure on food increases, the older offspring begin to disperse. A departing beaver leaves the lodge, cache, and underwater routes it has known since birth. The skills learned there now have to be applied to unfamiliar country, where deep water, suitable trees, and manageable current may appear together only in certain places. Beyond the family pond, the young beaver enters water that carries no familiar scent. A narrow creek may lead into a marsh, then widen toward a river crossed by roads and drainage pipes. Each place offers water, though only some provide the conditions needed for a lasting territory. Beavers can live beside lakes, rivers, marshes, roadside channels, and small forest streams. Their choice depends on several physical limits working together. Water must remain available through most or all of the year. Nearby plants must provide food and construction material. The current must be manageable enough for branches and mud to affect it. Banks also need enough soil for digging, anchoring wood, or creating a protected den. A shallow stream may look promising during spring rain and become nearly dry by late summer. That kind of seasonal change can leave a lodge entrance exposed and make a winter food cache impossible to protect. In colder regions, useful year-round water is often at least 2 to 3 feet deep. That depth gives the beaver room to dive beneath danger, reach an underwater entrance, and move below winter ice. A young beaver traveling through a broad lake may find that these needs are already satisfied. The shoreline can provide places for a lodge, while the open water offers escape and transport. Branches can be stored near the home without raising the lake level. In this setting, a dam would add little. Lake-dwelling families may build lodges and food caches while leaving the surrounding water unobstructed. Large rivers can offer similar advantages. Their channels may remain deep enough throughout the year, and their current can be too powerful for a practical dam. Beavers living along such rivers often excavate bank dens. An entrance begins below the waterline and rises into a chamber dug inside the bank. Natural cavities among roots or stones can also provide shelter. Smaller tributaries create a different opportunity. A stream flowing gently through a broad, low valley can be changed with far less material. The gradient, meaning the amount the land slopes over a given distance, strongly affects the current. Water moves more slowly across a gentle slope than down a steep mountain channel. A modest barrier in slow water may raise the upstream level across a wide patch of ground. The same pile of branches placed in a fast torrent could be swept away during the first heavy rain. Valley shape matters as well. A narrow channel between low banks may allow a short dam to hold back enough water for a pond. Steep, rocky walls can limit where material can be anchored. A broad floodplain may let rising water spread outward through old channels and wet soil. Local vegetation sets another boundary. Willow, aspen, cottonwood, and birch provide both food and flexible stems where those trees grow. A stream surrounded by grassland may offer water, but little woody material. One passing through mature conifers may contain many trunks, while providing less preferred bark close to shore. Distance from food changes the cost of every meal. A branch floated through water is supported by the pond and meets relatively little resistance. The same branch dragged across dry soil catches on roots, stones, and low plants. Long trips over land also expose the beaver to coyotes, wolves, bears, or large cats, depending on the region. A useful sight, keeps edible growth close enough that most of the journey can happen in water. No single feature decides the choice. A steady current may come with poor banks. Abundant willow may stand beside a channel that freezes to the bottom. Deep water may already provide shelter, while offering no safe place for a lodge. The animal responds to the complete setting through repeated visits, feeding attempts, resting places, and the changing conditions of the stream. Eventually, the traveling beaver reaches a narrow channel where willow grows close to both banks. The valley floor is nearly level. Water already collects in a shallow bend, though much of it remains too thin for a secure underwater entrance. A fallen branch catches between the banks and begins gathering leaves against its upstream side. Only a small obstruction has formed. Even so, the water behind it rises slightly and spreads into the grass. A few carefully placed branches could deepen a much larger area. The site has supplied the materials, the slope, and the first weak point in the current. Flowing water will now reveal where the work should begin. Water slips through a narrow gap between the fallen branch and the muddy bank. The flow speeds up as it enters the smaller opening. A soft stream becomes a sharper trickle, carrying bubbles and loose leaves through the same weak point. Whenever water is forced through a narrow space, its pressure and speed can change. The faster current strikes stones, wood, and the surface below, creating sound and vibration. A small drop on the downstream side adds splashing that can be heard from several feet away on a quiet night. These concentrated leaks draw a beaver's attention. The animal may approach from downstream, pause beside the opening, and place its front paws against the moving water. Sound offers one source of information. Changes in current can also be felt through the paws, whiskers, and body. A falling pond level provides a broader signal that water is escaping somewhere along the structure. Fresh storm damage may leave broken branches, washed out mud, or a new root around the edge. Beavers combine these cues while inspecting a dam. Running water has produced a strong response in controlled observations. In a well-known experiment, researchers played the sound of flowing water through a loudspeaker placed near a beaver enclosure. The animals carried material toward the speaker and attempted to cover the source, even though no real leak was present beneath it. Branches and mud gradually accumulated over the place where the recording was loudest. The observation showed that sound can help stimulate covering behavior. Real dams present a more complicated set of conditions. Water depth may change over several hours. A current can press directly against the beaver's fur. Cold water entering through a damaged lodge wall may be detected without producing much sound at all. The location of repair work therefore develops from several kinds of information arriving together. Experience can refine the response. A young beaver may begin with inherited urges to handle branches, dig into mud, and react to running water. Repeated work in the family territory teaches how different materials behave. Flexible willow stems bend between larger pieces. Wet mud seals small openings and later washes away if placed where the current remains too strong. A heavy stone may anchor the base of a weak section. These results are encountered through direct contact rather than formal calculation. The beaver does not need to picture a completed dam before construction begins. Each action changes the conditions that guide the following action. Suppose a branch is pushed across the loudest opening. Some water continues through the gaps, while the strongest current shifts a few inches toward one side. that new opening becomes louder and faster. The beaver places vegetation there, reducing the flow again. Water then searches for another route, perhaps beneath the branch or around its outer end. Repair follows the moving concentration of current. This process is called feedback. Feedback occurs when the result of an action changes the information used for the following action. A household thermostat provides a simple human example. The heater raises the room temperature, and the warmer air eventually causes the thermostat to switch the heater off. At a beaver dam, newly placed material changes the flow, and the altered flow reveals where more material may be useful. Many small responses can create a structure far more organized than any single movement. The pattern also allows the dam to adjust after construction. Spring snowmelt may raise a stream and force water over the top. Summer drought may expose openings that were previously submerged. A heavy rain can cut a new channel around one bank. Beavers continue visiting active dams because the stream never remains exactly the same. Some repairs take only minutes. Larger breaks may require several nights of carrying branches, collecting stones, and pressing mud into open spaces. Family members can arrive separately, each responding to the conditions left by the others. Their combined work slowly reduces the strongest leaks and spreads the current across a wider section. The first branch placed in the stream changes very little by itself. Its greatest effect is the new pattern of moving water that appears around it, quietly marking where the next piece can take hold. More branches begin to gather around the first weak obstruction. Some are thin willow stems that bend easily. Others are heavier pieces cut from shrubs or young trees near the bank. The beaver carries each one through the water and turns it until the branch catches against a stone, a root, or another piece of wood. These first branches form the frame. Their shape matters because crooked limbs and side twigs grip one another more securely than smooth poles. A branch wedged between both banks may hold the center of the structure, while smaller pieces fill the spaces around it. The dam begins as an uneven line across the shallowest part of the channel. Water still moves through almost every opening. Some of it slips below the lowest branches. Other flow bends toward the banks or passes between crossing sticks. The beaver adds material where the current remains strongest. Small stones can be carried with the front paws and pressed into gaps near the stream bed. Fresh grass, reeds, and leafy stems become tangled among the branches. Mud taken from the bottom is pushed into smaller openings, where it reduces the amount of water passing through. Each material performs a different job. Large wood resists the main force of the current. Flexible vegetation ties parts of the framework together. Mud slows the narrow leaks that remain after the larger openings have been covered. The finished structure remains porous. Porous means that it contains many tiny spaces through which water can still pass. A beaver dam rarely forms a completely solid wall. Water seeps through the branches, travels around the edges, and may spill gently over low points along the top. The important change is the extra resistance created by the structure. Hydraulic resistance is the force that slows water as it moves around solid objects and through narrow spaces. Every branch adds a little more resistance. The current begins losing speed as it approaches the growing dam. Faster water can carry grains of sand, pieces of leaf, and fine soil for long distances. Slower water has less energy available to keep that material moving. Some of the sediment settles onto the streambed upstream. Leaves and broken stems catch against the branches. Mud collects among the lowest pieces of wood. Over time, these deposits can broaden the upstream face and close gaps that the beavers never filled directly. The stream begins helping build the structure placed across it. Construction may continue outward from a fallen log or from branches already caught between the banks. One end can be anchored in soft soil, while the opposite end grows toward the center of the channel. In another setting, the dam may spread in several directions through a marsh, where water follows many shallow paths. Its final shape comes from the land beneath it. A narrow creek may require a structure only a few yards long. A broad, flat wetland can support a winding dam that crosses several channels and patches of higher ground. Exceptional dams can stretch for hundreds of feet. The largest known examples belong to long-established wetland systems maintained by multiple generations. Most beaver dams are far smaller. They often appear crooked, low, and patched with material of many different ages. Fresh, pale branches may rest beside dark wood softened by years underwater. Green plants can grow from sediment trapped along the upstream edge. Sections may be abandoned while new barriers appear nearby. Maintenance never truly stops while the colony depends on the pond. Autumn rain can raise the current and wash loose mud from the surface. Spring snowmelt may force water over the crest or open a channel around one end. Branches weaken as fungi and microbes slowly break down the wood. Ice can push against exposed sections during winter. Beavers respond by returning with replacement material and reinforcing the points where flow has become concentrated. Several small dams may also appear downstream or along side channels. These structures divide the force of moving water and help maintain depth across a wider area. A family may repair one barrier during the night and visit another before returning to the lodge. The work continues through repeated adjustments, each guided by the stream as it changes. From downstream, the growing wall remains the most obvious feature. Branches cross at different angles, mud fills dark spaces, and water threads through the surface. Upstream, the current has already begun to spread. The pond extends a little farther into the grass. Shallow places deepen by inches. The visible dam remains only the boundary of the larger change, because its most useful result is gathering quietly on the other side. As the pond deepens, the lower edge of the lodge disappears beneath the surface. A route that once crossed shallow water now leads into a dark opening below the waterline. The beaver dives, passes beneath a wall of branches and mud, then swims upward through a short tunnel. Its head breaks the surface inside a sheltered chamber. The floor remains dry because it sits above the pond level. This arrangement creates two separate heights within the same structure. The entrance stays underwater, while the resting platform rises above it. Water provides the protected approach. Careful placement of wood and mud creates the dry room. A freestanding lodge often appears as a rounded mound in the pond. Its outer wall may contain thick branches, smaller sticks, packed vegetation, stones, and layers of mud. The framework can reach several feet above the water and spread much wider below the surface. Some lodges measure more than 10 feet across, although size varies with colony age, shoreline shape, and available material. Other beavers build directly into a bank. They excavate a tunnel beneath the waterline and enlarge a chamber inside the soil. branches and mud may be added above the entrance or along the bank for support. A riverbank can therefore contain a complete shelter, even when no large mound is visible from shore. One lodge may have several underwater entrances. Separate tunnels give the family more than one route home and provide alternatives if ice, debris, or a predator blocks an approach. Inside, the living platform is lined with drier plant material. Family members rest there between feeding trips. Kits remain protected during their earliest weeks. Grooming also takes place inside, where the animals can comb water from their fur and spread protective oils through the dense undercoat. The outer walls require enough thickness to resist weather and predators. During autumn, beavers often press fresh mud into exposed surfaces. Cold winter air can freeze this wet layer into a hard shell. A frozen lodge wall is difficult for many predators to tear apart. The upper part still needs some small spaces between branches. Air passes through those gaps, allowing moisture and carbon dioxide from several breathing animals to escape. A perfectly sealed mound would become damp and poorly ventilated. The loose crown of branches works much like a rough air vent, while the lower walls remain dense and strong. Temperature inside the lodge is moderated by the surrounding structure. Wood and trapped air slow heat loss. Mud blocks wind near the lower walls. Snow can add another insulating layer during winter, much as it does over the den of another northern mammal. Body heat from the family also warms the chamber. Although the interior remains cool compared with a human home, deep water around the lodge protects every trip through the entrance. A coyote can walk along the bank, but it cannot easily follow a beaver through a submerged tunnel. Wolves, bears, and large cats may catch beavers on land when the opportunity arises. Predation risk falls sharply once the animal reaches water deep enough to dive and turn freely. The pond also shortens exposed travel. A beaver cutting willow near shore can release the branch and slip into the water within seconds. Its broad hind feet provide rapid acceleration below the surface. The tail helps guide the turn toward the lodge. A familiar underwater entrance can be reached in darkness, even when the shoreline above is covered with snow. The same lodge may remain in use for years. New branches enlarge the walls. Mud repairs damaged areas. Interior spaces can be widened as the family grows. Older material slowly softens and decays while fresh material is added around it. The result becomes a layered record of repeated winters and changing water levels. Safety begins close to the lodge, then spreads outward as the pond expands. Water reaches farther between tree roots and low plants. Shallow ground near the bank becomes easier to cross by swimming. Where the pond still ends too far from a feeding area, the beavers can extend the water itself by digging narrow channels through the soil. The beaver passes through the submerged entrance and swims away from the lodge along the pond's edge. Instead of climbing onto the bank, it turns into a narrow trench filled with water. The channel may be only a few feet wide, yet it reaches beyond the natural shoreline toward a patch of willow or young aspen. Beavers create these canals where the soil is soft enough to dig. Their front paws loosen mud from the bottom and sides. The material can be pushed aside or carried away as the channel deepens. Repeated swimming clears some loose sediment, while plant stems and fallen leaves must be removed as they gather. A maintained canal can extend the useful pond far into ground that once required travel on foot. The channel does not need to be deep enough for a complete dive. It only needs enough water to support the beaver's body and float the branches being carried home. This changes the effort required to move wood. A freshly cut branch dragged across land catches on roots, stones, and grass. Friction resists every pull. Friction is the force created when two surfaces move against one another. Water supports much of the branch's weight, allowing the same piece of wood to glide with far less resistance. A beaver can guide a long branch through a canal while swimming beside it or holding one end in its teeth. Side twigs may brush the banks, but most of the load remains afloat. The saved energy becomes important because feeding areas gradually move farther from the lodge. Trees close to an established pond are often harvested first. As preferred willow and aspen become less available nearby, the colony must reach new patches. A canal reduces the amount of open ground between those trees and the safety of deep water. Predators make that shorter land distance valuable. A coyote or wolf can move quickly across a bank. A beaver carrying a branch cannot turn or accelerate as easily on land. Inside a water-filled trench, the animal can release its load and dive when the channel is deep enough. Even a shallow canal gives it a faster route back toward the pond. Frequent travel leaves other marks across the territory. Trails develop where beavers repeatedly climb from the water toward feeding sites. The soil becomes packed beneath their feet. Low vegetation bends or disappears. Steeper routes may form smooth slides where the animals push down the bank and enter the pond. Fresh wood chips collect near active cutting areas, while older stumps mark places that have not been visited for months. These trails connect with canals, shallow feeding ponds, and the main body of water around the lodge. The arrangement fits what biologists call central place foraging. A central place forager repeatedly leaves a safe home base, gathers food or material, and returns to the same location. For a beaver family, the lodge and surrounding pond form that secure center. Travel becomes more costly as distance increases, so construction can reduce the effective distance between the home and useful plants. A tree may stand far from the original shoreline, while remaining only a short swim from the end of a canal. Some colonies maintain several dams within the same territory. A smaller barrier upstream can create a side pond near a feeding patch. Another dam may hold water in a channel that would otherwise become too shallow during summer. Food caches, bank dens, and cutting zones may be spread across the connected system. One structure supports another by keeping travel routes wet and usable. The network also changes with time. A canal may fill with silt after a storm and require clearing. Aquatic plants can narrow the passage during summer. Low water may lead the beavers to deepen part of the route or reinforce a nearby dam. When a feeding patch is exhausted, another channel may become more active, while the older one slowly fills with vegetation. From above, the colony's home extends well beyond the visible lodge. It includes worn banks, flooded side channels, submerged food stores, and several paths through which branches can be moved with little contact against dry ground. These routes were created for transport and safety. Each one also carries pond water into a new strip of earth, where moisture begins spreading through soil that once remained beyond the stream. Beyond the narrow canals, water begins spreading through places the original stream rarely touched. From above, the difference becomes clear. before the dam, most of the flow remained inside a single channel. Rainwater entered upstream, moved downhill, and passed through the valley with relatively little delay. After damming, part of that water gathers behind branches, mud, and trapped sediment. This temporary storage is called impoundment. The word simply means that flowing water has been held back long enough to collect. Depth increases near the dam and within low parts of the valley. At the same time, the current loses speed as it enters the broader pond. A narrow stream may become a patchwork of conditions. Deeper pools form near old channels. Shallow water spreads across grass and low banks. Side channels carry part of the flow around islands of vegetation. Saturated soil develops where the ground remains wet close to the surface. The beaver complex now contains moving water, still water, and broad damp margins within a relatively small area. A rainstorm shows how these differences affect the larger system. Water falling several miles upstream begins moving toward the pond through tributaries, roadside ditches, and sloping ground. Together, all the land draining toward the stream forms its catchment. A catchment may cover a few acres around a small headwater creek or many square miles around a larger river. The beavers respond only to conditions near their home. Yet the dam receives water collected from across that entire area. As storm flow reaches the pond, some of it raises the water level. Another portion spreads into side channels or moves across the floodplain. The floodplain is the lowland beside a stream that can receive water when the channel rises. Water also continues through the dam, around its ends, and over low places along the top. This wider route can delay part of the storm flow. The delay may last for hours or days, depending on pond size, soil, valley shape, and the condition of the dams. Several ponds arranged along the same stream can create repeated places where water slows and spreads. These effects vary greatly from one watershed to another. A broad valley with deep soil may hold more temporary water than a steep channel cut between rock walls. A small storm may fit within the ponds and surrounding wet ground. A very large storm can fill that storage quickly and send most additional water downstream. Old dams with open gaps behave differently from recently repaired structures. Channel slope, vegetation, and the number of dams also change the result. Beaver ponds can reduce or delay peak flow in some settings. Peak flow is the highest rate of water movement reached during a storm. They cannot guarantee that downstream flooding will disappear. A dam may also break when fast water pushes against weakened wood or cuts around one end. Stored pond water can then drain quickly, carrying sediment and branches into the channel below. The value of the system comes from how it changes the movement of water under particular conditions, rather than from acting as a permanent flood barrier. One especially important change occurs in streams that have become incised. An incised stream has cut downward into its bed until the channel sits below the surrounding floodplain. Water then passes through a trench, even during many storms, without reaching the nearby land. A beaver dam can raise the local water surface enough to reconnect parts of that channel with its floodplain. Water spills into old side channels, low hollows, and patches of vegetation that had been dry for years. This spreading reduces the amount of flow confined to one narrow path. The pond therefore changes several parts of stream movement at once. Depth rises near the structure. Velocity falls through the impounded area. flow follows more routes across a wider surface. Some stormwater remains in the valley longer before continuing downstream. The visible pond shows only part of this movement. Along its edges, water begins entering spaces between grains of sand, silt, and gravel. It moves sideways into the banks and downward through porous soil. A shallow zone of groundwater starts rising beneath nearby plants, carrying the pond's influence beyond the places where open water can be seen. As the current slows and spreads, suspended material also begins responding to the loss of speed. What the stream once carried onward may soon settle into the changing ground around it. A grain of silt drifting through the pond begins to fall as the current loses speed. Silt is made of particles finer than sand, but coarser than clay. In a fast stream, turbulence can keep those particles moving. Turbulence means the irregular mixing and swirling that occurs within flowing water. The quieter pond produces less of that motion, allowing gravity to draw the grain toward the bottom. One particle adds almost nothing by itself. Across many storms and seasons, countless grains settle behind the dam. Thin layers begin forming over the older streambed. Sand collects where incoming water first slows. Finer silt and clay can travel farther into the pond before settling. Leaves become caught among branches or sink after absorbing water. Broken twigs, bark, pollen, and dead aquatic plants join the growing deposit. This organic matter contains carbon that was once held inside living tissue. It also carries nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus. Over time, the bottom develops into a mixture of mineral sediment and partially decayed plant material. The dam itself can trap some of this material. Mud fills gaps among the lower branches. Roots grow into moist sediment near the edges. New plant stems slow the water further, helping more particles settle around them. Parts of an old structure may gradually disappear beneath a wider shelf of earth. The rising pond also presses water into the banks. Soil contains small spaces between grains of sand, silt, gravel, and decaying material. When those spaces connect, water can move through them. This quality is called permeability. Coarse gravel usually allows faster movement than tightly packed clay because its spaces are larger and better connected. Pond water can move sideways through these porous layers and into the floodplain. Old stream channels buried beneath soil may carry it farther from the visible shoreline. As more water enters the ground, the shallow water table can rise. The water table marks the level below which soil and rock spaces remain. Filled with water, roots growing near the pond may now reach moisture during periods when the surface appears dry. Low places can remain saturated for weeks after rain has ended. Water that once passed through the valley in several hours may remain within pond sediment, bank soil, and shallow groundwater for much longer. This increased residence time changes the pond's chemistry. Residence time describes how long water stays within a place before moving onward. Longer contact allows water to interact with sediment, plant roots, and microscopic organisms. Bacteria can transform nitrogen from one chemical form into another. Where oxygen remains available, some bacteria convert ammonium into nitrate. In low oxygen mud, other microbes may convert nitrate into nitrogen gas, which can then leave the water and enter the atmosphere. The exact result depends on temperature, oxygen, and the type of organic material present. Oxygen often decreases, where still water contains large amounts of decaying vegetation. Microbes use oxygen while breaking that material down. Fish and aquatic insects that require highly oxygenated water may avoid those pockets. Other organisms tolerate or even prefer the slower, darker conditions near the pond bottom. Temperature also develops into a patchwork. Sunlight can warm shallow surface water during summer. A shaded side channel may remain cooler. Groundwater moving through deeper soil can emerge at a lower and steadier temperature than the pond surface. This creates small differences across the same wetland, sometimes within only a few yards. Beaver activity can improve certain measures of water quality in one setting, while changing them less helpfully in another. Sediment and some nutrients may become trapped before reaching downstream water. The pond can also release dissolved organic matter, meaning tiny carbon-rich compounds that mix completely into the water. Warm, shallow ponds may raise downstream temperatures during certain seasons. Organic-rich areas may develop low oxygen. A study published in 2025 examined urban streams in Oregon and found measurable water quality changes around beaver structures, though the direction and size of those changes differed among sites. Local soil, stream flow, shade, pollution, and pond age all affected the outcome. The continuing lesson comes from the altered timing of water. Slower flow allows sediment to settle. Longer residence gives microbes more time to process nutrients. Raised groundwater keeps surrounding soil wet after the surface current has moved on. These processes continue through daylight and darkness, whether the beavers are feeding, resting, or temporarily away from the pond. As moisture remains around the roots, plant species begin responding according to how much water and oxygen they can tolerate. The narrow line of trees beside the old stream is already entering a different set of growing conditions. Water now surrounds roots that once grew in soil exposed to air. Those roots still need oxygen. Plant cells use oxygen during cellular respiration, the chemical process that releases usable energy from sugars. In dry or moderately moist soil, oxygen moves through small air spaces between particles and reaches the roots. Flooding fills many of those spaces with water. Gases move thousands of times more slowly through water than through air, so oxygen cannot be replaced as quickly as roots and soil microbes consume it. Conditions near the pond bottom may become oxygen poor within days. Some streamside plants tolerate this change. Others begin to weaken after their roots remain submerged for weeks or months. Aspen, birch, and many upland conifers can suffer when water covers their root zones for too long. Fine roots may die first. The tree then absorbs less water and fewer minerals, even though the surrounding ground appears saturated. Branches thin over following seasons, bark loosens, and parts of the crown may stop producing leaves. A tree already stressed by flooding also becomes more vulnerable to fungi and insects. Some trunks eventually fall into the pond. Others remain standing after death. These upright dead trees are called snags. A snag no longer produces leaves, yet its structure continues serving the wetland. Woodpeckers can excavate cavities in softened trunks. Ducks may later use abandoned holes for nests. Dragonflies rest on exposed branches, while insects and fungi slowly break down the wood. A drowned tree can remain part of the habitat for many years, after its roots stop functioning. The opening of the forest canopy changes conditions below. Sunlight that once struck upper leaves now reaches the pond surface and muddy margins. Warmer, brighter shallows support aquatic plants that could not grow beneath dense shade. Their distribution follows water depth and the amount of time the soil remains flooded. Cattails often root in shallow water, where their stems can rise above the surface. Sedges occupy wet ground around the margins, especially where water levels change through the year. Rushes grow in saturated soil and along quiet channels. Pond lilies anchor their roots in bottom sediment while broad leaves float in sunlight above. Submerged plants remain beneath the surface, providing cover among their stems. Willows may establish on damp banks or newly deposited sediment, where their roots can tolerate frequent flooding. A narrow stream corridor has now become a mosaic. Open water lies near the old channel. Shallow marsh spreads around its edges. Shrubs grow on slightly higher ground, while snags rise through the pond. The boundaries keep shifting. Sediment entering from upstream gradually makes some areas shallower. Plants trap additional silt around their roots and stems. Beavers may raise the dam after a leak, flooding ground that had begun to dry. A breach can lower the pond within hours or days, exposing mud that had been underwater for years. Seeds carried by wind, animals, and flowing water soon reach the exposed bottom. Grasses and sedges can cover the damp sediment. Wildflowers may appear where sunlight remains strong. As roots bind the surface, the former pond can develop into a beaver meadow. These meadows often retain deep, organic-rich soil, built from trapped sediment and decayed plants. A stream may cut a smaller channel through the middle, while the surrounding ground stays moist. If beavers remain absent and the water table continues falling, shrubs begin spreading across the meadow. Young trees follow where the soil gains enough oxygen. Over several decades, parts of the site may return to woodland. A later beaver family can interrupt that process by repairing an old dam or building nearby. Water rises again, and the sequence begins under a new arrangement of channels and plants. Ecologists call this ecological succession. Succession is the gradual change in a biological community as conditions and species alter one another over time. Around a beaver pond, the sequence has no single permanent endpoint. Forest can become open water. A pond can fill into marsh. A drained wetland can develop into meadow before woody plants return. Each stage leaves soil, dead wood, roots, and channels that influence the stage following it. The result contains more physical variety than the original narrow stream. Deep pools sit close to warm shallows. Dense stems border open water. Hollow snags rise beside soft mud and flowering meadow plants. Along one flooded edge, the first cluster of amphibian eggs clings to a submerged stem, while aquatic insects begin using the newly quiet water around it. Within the shallow water, clusters of eggs cling to submerged stems. Frogs and salamanders often choose calm edges where strong current will not sweep their eggs downstream. Sunlight reaches the water, while nearby vegetation offers shade and cover. As the young hatch, they enter a pond already divided into many small habitats. Some remain among cattail stems near shore. Others move through submerged plants rooted in softer sediment. Aquatic insects use the same layers in different ways. Dragonfly larvae hunt along the bottom for months or even years. Before climbing a stem, and emerging as winged adults. Mosquito larvae develop near the surface, where they breathe through small tubes. Caddisfly larvae may build protective cases from sand grains, leaf fragments, or tiny pieces of wood. When these insects leave the water, they carry energy from the pond into the air and surrounding forest. Bats can feed above the surface after dusk, catching flying insects with rapid turns, guided by echolocation. Echolocation allows an animal to send out high sounds and interpret the returning echoes. Along the open water, ducks search for seeds, aquatic plants, and small animals. Marsh vegetation can conceal nests from some predators. Standing dead trees provide elevated perches and hollow spaces. Woodpeckers excavate cavities in softened trunks, and later birds may use those same openings. Dead wood also supports beetle larvae, fungi, and other organisms that gradually return its nutrients to the wetland. The shrubs around the pond create another layer. Willow shoots provide food for moose, deer, and other browsing mammals. Dense stems give small birds places to nest close to water. Wet meadows beyond the pond can support grasses, flowering plants, and insects that would have been scarce beneath the original shaded stream corridor. The growing variety of life comes from the variety of physical conditions. Deep water offers a refuge during drought or winter cold. Shallow margins warm more quickly and support different plants. Mud, gravel, submerged wood, and open water each provide a different surface on which organisms can feed, rest, hide, or reproduce. Beavers do not directly provide food or shelter to every species around the pond. Their construction changes the environment, and those physical changes create new opportunities. This is why biologists describe beavers as ecosystem engineers. An ecosystem engineer is an organism that alters the physical surroundings in ways that change the resources available to other living things. The phrase applies to animals such as corals, termites, and prairie dogs, as well as beavers. Beavers are also frequently described as a keystone species. A keystone species does not have to be the most common animal in a habitat. Its influence is unusually large compared with its numbers. A single beaver family may occupy one lodge, while the water held by its dams affects acres of plants and many species that never encounter the builders directly. A clear example comes from Bandelier National Monument in northern New Mexico. Frijoles Canyon contains a narrow stream flowing through dry country, shaped by steep volcanic cliffs. Historical grazing, erosion, floods, and the loss of beavers had simplified parts of the waterway. Beginning in 2019, restoration work returned beavers to the canyon. By 2024, 27 animals had been released there. Their dams help create deeper pools, wet banks, and more varied stream habitat. Those ponds became part of wider restoration efforts involving native fish, such as the Rio Grande chub and Rio Grande sucker. The Rio Grande cutthroat trout, a cold water fish native to the region, also depends on connected stream habitats with suitable temperature and cover. Native leopard frogs can use still or slowly moving water for breeding. Wet vegetation near the restored ponds supports the endangered New Mexico meadow jumping mouse, a small mammal associated with dense growth beside streams and wetlands. Each species responds to a different part of the changed landscape. The frog uses shallow breeding water. A jumping mouse depends on moist vegetation. Fish may use deeper pools when surrounding channels become warm or shallow. Those differences explain why a beaver pond can support more biological variety than a straight channel with one depth and one current speed. The relationship becomes more complicated where fish must pass through the dam itself. A pond may provide food, shelter, or refuge upstream, while the barrier changes movement between reaches of the stream. The result depends on the fish, the season, the water level, and the changing structure of the dam. Below the dam, a young fish moves through the faster current and reaches a wall of crossed branches, mud, and trapped leaves. Water is passing through the structure, though no single route appears wide enough at first glance. During low flow, a natural beaver dam can temporarily limit movement. A shallow stream may leave only thin sheets of water over the crest. Small gaps can become blocked by sediment, while side channels may no longer connect with the main current. Conditions often change after rain or snowmelt. Rising water opens submerged passages, fills channels around the ends of the dam, and creates deeper flow across low sections. Fish may pass through openings among branches, follow routes around the bank, or swim over the top when enough water covers it. Their success depends on several details. A large adult salmon can push through stronger current than a newly emerged juvenile. A low, porous dam presents a different obstacle from a tall structure packed tightly with mud. Discharge also matters. Discharge is the amount of water passing a point in the stream during a set period of time. Higher discharge can create usable routes, although extremely fast flow may become difficult for smaller fish. Species, body size, season, and dam condition all shape the result. Looking only at the moment a fish reaches the barrier gives an incomplete picture. The pond upstream may influence months of feeding, shelter, and growth. Juvenile coho salmon often use slow pools during winter, when fast currents can force small fish to spend valuable energy simply holding their position. Quiet water allows them to rest near woody cover and search for insects carried through the pond. Deeper pools can remain available when nearby channels shrink during summer. A complex beaver wetland may contain shaded margins, submerged branches, gravelly channels, and pools connected to groundwater. Groundwater can enter at a steadier temperature than surface water. This sometimes creates cooler pockets during warm weather. Sunlit, shallow ponds can also become warmer, especially where tree cover has been reduced. Temperature effects therefore depend on depth, shade, water source, season, and the time water remains in the pond. Researchers have tested fish movement through structures designed to resemble beaver dams. These beaver dam analogues commonly use wooden posts and woven branches to slow water in damaged streams. Field experiments have recorded juvenile salmonids moving across them in both directions. Salmonids are members of the fish family that include salmon, trout, and char. Passage often occurs through temporary gaps or side channels that become usable as flow changes. Bridge Creek in central Oregon provides a larger example. The stream crosses dry rangeland within the John Day River basin. Years of channel erosion had left parts of it narrow and deeply cut into the valley floor. Beginning in the late 2000s, restoration teams installed beaver dam analogues and encouraged beavers to maintain or expand them. The treatments raised local water levels and increased the amount of slow, complex habitat. Channels spread into parts of the floodplain. Pools deepened behind structures, while side channels and wet margins became more common. Researchers tracking steelhead found higher juvenile density, survival, and production in treated reaches. Noe later reported that these reaches produced nearly twice as many juvenile steelhead within several years. The same study did not detect a disruption of upstream or downstream migration caused by the restoration structures. That result belongs to Bridge Creek and its particular fish, climate, valley shape, and restoration design. Other streams can produce different outcomes. A poorly placed dam may block access during drought. Warm, shallow water can create unsuitable conditions for cold water species. Sudden dam failure may release sediment or rapidly lower a refuge pool. The structure itself also changes from week to week. Mud washes out, branches decay. A family may repair one opening while water begins cutting around the opposite bank. Older ponds fill with sediment and develop new channels through their margins. Fish encounter a moving system rather than one permanent barrier. The value of the pond shifts as seasons pass. Young fish grow and water levels rise or fall. A dam that briefly slows movement may support months of feeding upstream. Later, a breach can reconnect the channel and drain part of the pond. Understanding the effect requires following the fish and the changing habitat through time, long after the first attempt to cross. Years pass, and the deep water behind the dam slowly becomes shallower. Each storm carries more sand, silt, leaves, and broken plant material into the pond. The current loses speed, and much of that material settles before reaching the dam. Layers build across the old stream bed. Aquatic plants spread into the new shallows, while roots hold additional sediment in place. A pond that once covered several acres may gradually develop marshy edges and patches of firm ground. The beaver family changes the area at the same time. Willow and aspen close to the shoreline are often cut first, because they require the shortest and safest journeys. After several years, the remaining preferred trees may stand much farther from open water. Every trip across land costs more energy and increases exposure to predators. Canals can extend access for a time, though they cannot bring every distant food source within reach. A colony may shift its activity toward another part of the valley or leave the pond entirely. Food shortage is only one possible cause. Drought can lower the water until lodge entrances and food caches become exposed. A large flood may tear through the dam or fill the pond with debris. Predators, disease, and conflict with neighboring beavers can also reduce a family or force survivors to move. When regular maintenance ends, the structure begins changing quickly. Mud washes from small openings. Branches soften as fungi and microbes break down the wood. Water may cut through the center or carve a path around one end. A narrow leak can widen during heavy rain, allowing part of the pond to drain within hours. The stream then returns to the sediment stored behind the dam. Its current begins cutting a channel through layers that may have accumulated over many years. Banks collapse into the new flow. Small pools remain in depressions, while higher parts of the former bottom emerge into sunlight. The exposed soil often contains more organic matter than the original streamside ground. Decayed leaves, fine sediment, and plant fragments have been mixed together beneath the pond. Seeds soon arrive by wind, water, and animal movement. Sedges often colonize the wettest areas. Grasses spread where the surface dries enough for their roots. Wildflowers may appear during summer, and willow seedlings can take hold along the new channel. This broad, damp opening is commonly called a beaver meadow. The name describes a stage in the landscape rather than an abandoned structure alone. The stream continues moving through the meadow, sometimes following its former channel and sometimes cutting a new path. Standing dead trees remain around the edges. Old canals may persist as shallow, water-filled lines hidden beneath vegetation. Buried branches and dark bands of pond sediment can remain below the surface for decades. If water levels stay low, shrubs gradually spread across the meadow. Young trees establish where soil contains enough oxygen. A woodland may return over several decades, though it rarely matches the exact forest that stood there before flooding. The soil has changed. The channel has moved. Openings, wet hollows, and old deposits continue influencing which plants can grow. A later beaver may enter the same valley and find that much of the earlier work remains useful. An old dam foundation can catch fresh branches. A partly filled canal may require less digging than a new route. Willows growing in the meadow provide food close to water. Repairing one weakened barrier can flood the ground again and begin another pond cycle. Across an entire watershed, these stages exist beside one another. One family may occupy a fresh pond with newly cut trees. Farther downstream, an older pond has become shallow marsh. Another site may contain a meadow formed after a breach 50 years earlier. Sediment studies and ecological reviews show that beaver-shaped environments can persist or return in the same valleys across centuries. Their signatures remain in buried soil, altered channels, wetland deposits, and the pattern of vegetation above them. The landscape therefore develops through repeated building, filling, draining, and recolonization. No single pond represents the complete process. Each one is a temporary stage within a much longer sequence, carrying the work of animals that may have disappeared generations ago. Beneath those recent layers lies an even older history, reaching back through extinct species and unfamiliar bodies to the first members of the beaver family, millions of years before any modern dam crossed a stream. Far below an old beaver meadow, dark layers of pond sediment can preserve branches, pollen, shells, and fragments of bone. The youngest deposits may be only decades old. Deeper layers can belong to landscapes that existed long before the modern stream found its present course. Fossil teeth are especially useful because enamel survives burial better than many other tissues. Their shape can reveal what an extinct animal ate and how its jaws moved. Bones from the limbs, skull, and tail can provide clues about digging, swimming, and life on land. The beaver family is called Castoridae. Scientists have identified roughly 30 fossil genera within this family. A genus is a group of closely related species, such as the modern genus Castor, which contains the two beavers alive today. The oldest known members of the wider family appeared in North America near the end of the Eocene epoch. That was more than 30 million years ago, during a time when the world was gradually cooling and many modern groups of mammals were still developing their familiar forms. By the early Oligocene, beaver relatives had spread across large parts of the northern hemisphere. Fossils have been found in North America, Europe, and Asia. These animals did not all resemble the broad-tailed swimmers seen beside ponds today. Several early branches were small burrowers. Paleocastor, whose name means ancient beaver, lived on the North American Great Plains during the Oligocene. Its body was adapted for moving through soil. Powerful forelimbs supplied digging force, while enlarged front feet helped loosen and push earth. The tail was shorter than that of a modern beaver and lacked the same broad swimming surface. This animal spent much of its life underground in dry grassland, rather than maintaining a lodge surrounded by deep water. Paleocastor and its relatives are linked to unusual fossil burrows known as dimonelics. The name means devil's corkscrew. These structures descend through hardened sediment in tall spirals before opening into chambers below. Some reach several feet beneath the ancient ground surface. When the spirals were first examined during the 19th century, researchers debated whether they had been made by plants or some unfamiliar geological process. Bones found within them eventually showed that burrowing beavers had excavated the tunnels. Their curved paths may have strengthened the burrow walls and made it harder for predators to enter directly. Elsewhere in the family tree, other beavers developed bodies increasingly suited to water. Changes in the hind limbs provided stronger swimming strokes. Skulls and teeth shifted as different lineages fed on aquatic plants, bark, or other vegetation. Tail shapes also varied. These changes appeared along separate branches rather than as one smooth march toward the modern form. Evolution preserves traits that help animals reproduce under local conditions. A digging body worked well in open ground. Semi-aquatic features became valuable around rivers, lakes, and wetlands. Many combinations appeared, lasted for millions of years, and then disappeared. Beavers adapted to water became especially diverse during the Miocene epoch, which began about 23 million years ago. Wetlands and river systems across the northern hemisphere supported several semi-aquatic lineages. Their fossils show a growing range of body sizes and feeding styles. Evidence of swimming does not automatically demonstrate dam construction. A beaver relative could live beside water, eat aquatic plants, and shelter in banks without cutting trees or raising a pond. Wooden dams rarely fossilize clearly, so behavior must be reconstructed with care. Buried branches, ancient pond deposits, tooth marks, and local anatomy can provide clues, though certainty is often limited. The modern genus Castor appears in fossils from the late Miocene, several million years before the present. Its earliest geographic history remains under study. Comparisons of skulls and fossils suggest that modern beavers may have connections to ancestors living in Asia before related populations spread west into Europe and east into North America. Gaps in the fossil record prevent a final answer about the exact place where the genus began. By the time Castor became established, the beaver family had already explored many ways of living. Small tunnel builders had occupied dry plains. Swimming forms had fed in ancient wetlands. Several lineages reached sizes far beyond those of today's species. The modern beaver inherited one particular combination of continuously growing teeth, semi-aquatic movement, family life, and environmental construction. That combination survived after most other branches vanished. Among the lost forms were animals whose bodies approached the size of a black bear, though their great weight did not produce the same power to reshape flowing water. The largest of those lost forms belonged to the genus Castoroides. Castoroides ohioensis moved through North American wetlands during the Pleistocene epoch, the long span of repeated ice ages that ended about 11,700 years ago. Large estimates place the animal near 7 feet in length and around 276 pounds. A modern North American beaver might weigh 40 or 50 pounds, so the giant species could have been several times heavier. Its skull was broad, and its front teeth were much larger than those of the beavers living today. The teeth also had a different shape. Modern beaver incisors have smooth front surfaces suited to cutting bark and wood with a narrow edge. Castoroids had deeply grooved incisors with ridges running along their faces. Those grooves may have helped the animal pull or process tough water plants. Evidence from fossil chemistry supports a strongly aquatic diet. Plants growing beneath water absorb different forms of carbon and oxygen than many plants growing on dry land. Those chemical differences can remain inside tooth enamel after fossilization. When researchers examined giant beaver teeth, the chemical pattern pointed toward heavy feeding on submerged vegetation. The animal may have eaten pondweed, reeds, roots, and other plants growing within shallow lakes and marshes. Its tail also appears to have differed from the broad paddle of modern castor. Fossil bones near the base of the tail suggest a narrower shape. That tail could still have aided movement through water, though it probably did not provide the same steering surface seen in living beavers. The rest of the body was well suited to wetlands. Large hind limbs helped it move through shallow water, and its great size may have offered some protection from smaller predators. No convincing evidence shows that Castoroides cut down trees or constructed dams. A body weighing more than 200 pounds could move large amounts of vegetation, yet physical strength alone does not create engineering behavior. Dam building depends on a linked set of traits. The animal must cut manageable pieces of wood, carry them through water, react to leaks, maintain a stable territory, and repeat repairs over long periods. Modern beavers combine all of those abilities. The giant beaver appears to have followed a different ecological path, living within wetlands created by climate, rivers, and other natural processes. Castoroids disappeared near the end of the last ice age, roughly 10,000 years ago. Its extinction occurred during a period of rapid warming, shrinking wetlands, and widespread losses among North America's largest mammals. Human hunters were also spreading across the continent during this period. Researchers continue to debate the exact contribution of climate change and human activity to many late Ice Age extinctions. For the giant beaver, the loss of broad, stable wetlands may have been especially important because its diet and body were closely tied to aquatic vegetation. Two much smaller members of the family survived. The North American beaver, Castor canadensis, remained across North America. Castor fiber, the Eurasian beaver, survived in Europe and Asia. They resemble one another closely enough that early naturalists sometimes treated them as geographic forms of the same animal. Genetic research confirms that they are separate species. They also differ in skull shape, chromosome number, and certain details of the tail and scent glands. Their daily lives follow remarkably similar patterns. Both species cut woody plants and store branches beneath cold water. Families build lodges or occupy bank dens. Canals extend safe travel toward feeding areas. Dams raise water where natural depth is insufficient. This flexible construction allows modern beavers to create some of the habitat they require. A shallow stream can become a pond. A dry margin can become a wet feeding route. A damaged barrier can be repaired after storms. That ability may have helped the genus Castor survive changing climates and landscapes, though no single trait can fully explain why one evolutionary branch endured while others disappeared. The survivors were smaller than Castoroids, yet their effects reached far beyond the space occupied by their bodies. Their dams altered streams, created wetlands, and changed plant communities across broad regions of the Northern Hemisphere. This same way of life produced another feature that would soon draw sustained human attention. Cold water survival required a coat with thick guard hairs and extremely dense underfur. Once that fur entered international trade, the two surviving beaver species faced a pressure more organized and widespread than any predator around their ponds. Beneath the long guard hairs lies a thick layer of soft underfur that traps air close to the beaver's skin. That dense inner coat keeps cold water from removing body heat too quickly. It also contains fine fibers that bend, catch against one another, and bind tightly when worked with heat, moisture, and pressure. European hat makers used those fibers to produce felt. A finished felt hat held its shape, resisted rain, and survived years of regular use. By the early 1600s, styles made from beaver felt had become valuable across parts of Europe. Demand reached far beyond the workshops where the hats were formed. Every finished piece began with an animal living beside a North American lake, river, marsh, or forest stream. Commercial exchange intensified in New France during the early 1600s. French traders entered waterways that indigenous nations had traveled and understood for generations. Communities across the continent already possessed detailed knowledge of beaver behavior. Hunters knew where families built lodges, how territories changed through winter, and which ponds could be reached along connected rivers. They also knew how to prepare skins, preserve meat, move goods across portages, and travel safely through country that European newcomers had never seen. A portage is an overland route used to carry boats and cargo between waterways. These routes joined rivers into long transportation networks. Canoes could move large bundles of pelts through lakes and narrow streams, then cross a short stretch of forest before entering another drainage basin. The trade depended on indigenous labor, knowledge, and regional relationships. European companies supplied metal tools, cloth, firearms, kettles, and other manufactured goods. Indigenous traders decided where to hunt, how to prepare the pelts, and how goods moved through existing alliances and rivalries. The exchange changed local economies and political relationships, while epidemics and colonial expansion caused severe losses that extended far beyond the beaver trade itself. In 1670, King Charles II of England granted a royal charter to the Hudson's Bay Company. The charter gave the company broad trading claims over the enormous region drained by rivers flowing into Hudson Bay. Company posts appeared near the coast, allowing indigenous traders to bring pelts from the interior. Farther south and west, Montreal-based merchants developed competing routes. Their partnerships eventually formed the Northwest Company, which became a major rival during the late 1700s. Competition pushed traders deeper into the continent. Posts appeared along rivers and lakes across what is now Canada and parts of the northern United States. Canoe brigades carried cargo for thousands of miles. The struggle between the two companies became expensive and sometimes violent. In 1821, the Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company merged under the Hudson's Bay name. Beaver skins also became a unit for measuring value. For roughly the first 200 years of Hudson's Bay Company accounting, ledgers often used the made beaver. One made beaver represented a prime adult winter skin that had been properly prepared. A blanket might be valued at several made beaver. A smaller fur or simple trade item could be listed as a fraction of one. The system allowed many goods to be compared through a shared commercial standard, even where coins were rarely used. Intensive trapping continued across one watershed after another. Exact estimates of the beaver population before large-scale European trade vary widely. The continent was enormous, records were incomplete, and populations naturally changed with climate, predators, disease, and habitat. The decline itself is clear. By the 19th century, beavers had disappeared from many places where their dams had once shaped streams. Their removal affected more than the number of animals beside the water. Unrepaired dams broke down. Some ponds drained and gradually became meadows or channels. Wet ground dried as local water tables fell. The loss unfolded differently in every valley, though many landscapes lost the repeated cycles of pond building, sediment trapping, and floodplain wetting that beaver families had maintained. Fashion changed during the 19th century, and silk hats reduced part of the demand for beaver felt. Conservation laws, reintroductions, and changing land use later allowed both living species to recover in many regions. Canada formally recognized the beaver as an official national symbol in 1975. By then, the animal had served as food, fur, money, company emblem, and national image. Its return also brought back the physical behavior that human settlement had spent generations removing. Beavers entered watersheds now crossed by roads, culverts, farms, rail lines, and property boundaries, placing their old methods of controlling water inside a newly divided landscape. A narrow metal culvert carries stream water beneath a road. The pipe concentrates the flow into one opening, where the current becomes faster and louder. To a beaver, this resembles the kind of leak or channel that has guided dam repair for millions of years. Branches begin collecting against the entrance. Mud fills the lower gaps. Within a few nights, water may rise high enough to spread across the roadside ditch. The same behavior that creates useful wetlands in a forest can become expensive beside human infrastructure. A blocked culvert can flood the gravel beneath a road and weaken its foundation. Water may enter farm fields or back up toward homes. Septic systems can stop working properly when surrounding soil becomes saturated. Along rail corridors, persistent flooding can soften the ground supporting tracks. Commercial forests may lose trees whose roots remain underwater, while orchard owners may find fruit trees cut near the base. The beaver continues responding to water depth, current, and access to food. Property lines do not change those signals. Removing the dam may lower the pond for a short time. The exposed culvert soon produces concentrated flow again. Beavers can rebuild rapidly, especially when suitable branches and mud remain nearby. If the resident family is removed, another beaver may eventually discover the same location because the underlying site still offers water, food, and an obvious point of strong current. Successful management often changes the flow cues rather than repeatedly clearing the same opening. A culvert fence can be installed around the pipe entrance. Its metal mesh spreads the active flow across a much wider perimeter and keeps branches away from the narrow mouth of the pipe. The beaver may place material against parts of the fence, though blocking the entire structure requires far more work than sealing one small opening. Water continues reaching the culvert through the spaces that remain open. Pond leveling pipes use a different method. A pipe passes through the dam or carries water around it. The intake is placed away from the place where water visibly pours through the structure. A large protective cage may surround that intake so branches cannot easily block it. Water then leaves the pond quietly through the pipe, maintaining a selected maximum depth while part of the wetland remains intact. These systems still require inspection. Leaves can gather around a fence. Ice may damage exposed parts. A very large flood can overwhelm a structure designed for ordinary flow. Some sites lack enough space, stable soil, or safe downstream drainage for these methods. Road safety and protection of buildings may require partial dam removal, relocation, or other direct control. Ecological history creates an equally important boundary. North American beavers belong naturally across much of Canada, the United States, and northern Mexico. Their dams developed alongside plants and animals exposed to beaver activity over long periods. A very different outcome followed their introduction to Tierra del Fuego. This cold archipelago lies at the southern end of South America, divided between Argentina and Chile. In 1946, 20 North American beavers were released on the Argentine side in an attempt to create a commercial fur industry. The industry never developed as intended. The animals spread through rivers, peatlands, and forests across the islands. Tierra del Fuego contained few effective predators capable of limiting them. Its native forests had also developed without repeated beaver cutting and flooding. Trees such as southern beech often failed to regenerate after ponds drowned their roots and beavers removed nearby growth. The change valleys could remain open long after a dam was abandoned. A mapping study published in 2020 examined high-resolution aerial images across roughly 73,000 square kilometers. Researchers identified 206,203 active and inactive dams. Some older structures hidden by vegetation were probably missed, meaning the true total may have been higher. The beavers performed the same basic actions seen in North America. They cut plants, blocked moving water, and expanded ponds around secure shelter. Location changed the result. Within native watersheds, those actions can restore wetland processes lost through historical trapping or channel damage. Beside a road, they can threaten transportation and private property. In an ecosystem with no long history of beaver engineering, they can transform vegetation faster than local species recover. Useful management begins by examining the particular stream, landscape, and human need involved. The challenge ahead lies in deciding where beaver-made water can be welcomed, where its level must be controlled, and where continued expansion would create lasting harm. Along a damaged stream, restoration workers drive wooden posts into the channel bed. Branches are woven between them, while stones, cut vegetation, and local sediment close some openings. The finished barrier is called a beaver dam analog. It imitates several effects of a natural dam. Water slows behind the structure and begins spreading toward the banks. Sediment settles. The raised surface may reconnect the channel with parts of its floodplain, giving willow and other streamside plants access to wetter soil. These projects often aim to create conditions that real beavers can later maintain. A living colony can repair leaks, extend channels, and adjust its structures as water levels change. People can build the first obstruction, then allow animal behavior and stream flow to shape what follows. results remain strongly tied to place. A United States Geological Survey study published in 2024 examined 70 beaver dam analogues installed in a desert river system to support relocated beavers. Beaver activity appeared at only 2 of the structures. Monsoon floods damaged natural dams, and the analogues did not substantially improve survival or the animals' willingness to remain at the release sites. The study showed that a useful restoration method in one valley may accomplish little where floods, vegetation, and seasonal flow create different limits. Public policy is beginning to reflect that need for planning. On February the 28th, 2025, England published guidance allowing licensed releases of beavers into the wild. Projects must consider habitat, nearby infrastructure, local landowners, and long-term management. In February 2026, Natural England announced 2 new licensed wild release projects in southwest England, while additional proposals continued through assessment. Each release requires years of decisions about where dams can remain, how conflicts will be handled, and what changes the surrounding catchment can support. In the western United States, one possible benefit appears during wildfire. Researchers compared streamside corridors with active beaver damming against similar areas without it across 5 large fires. Satellite measurements showed an average reduction in vegetation greenness of about 19% in beaver-influenced corridors, compared with about 51% elsewhere. Water stored in ponds, canals, floodplain soil, and shallow groundwater helped vegetation remain moist, while nearby land burned more severely. These wet strips can provide temporary refuge for plants and animals. Their protection is local, and intense fire can still cross or damage them. A beaver wetland changes the water available along a corridor without making an entire landscape fireproof. Farther north, the same water storing behavior is producing a more uncertain result. Researchers using satellite images from 2015 through 2019 mapped about 12,000 beaver ponds across Arctic tundra in Alaska. Most surveyed regions contained roughly twice as many ponds as they had about 20 years earlier. Aerial photographs taken between 1949 and 1955 showed no detectable beaver ponds in some western Alaskan coastal areas, where many later appeared. Warmer conditions, taller shrubs, longer growing seasons, and changing winter stream flow have made parts of the tundra more usable for beavers. New ponds provide aquatic habitat and can keep patches of water unfrozen for longer periods. They also place relatively warm water against permafrost, the ground that normally remains frozen for at least 2 consecutive years. Thaw can cause the surface to sink, redirect streams, and release carbon stored in frozen soil. Microbes may convert part of that carbon into carbon dioxide or methane. The amount released, the amount newly stored in pond sediment, and the long-term climate balance remain uncertain. Beavers are expanding a process whose full Arctic consequences are still being measured. At dusk, the original pond looks simple again. A pointed stump stands near the bank, holding the marks of incisors that renew themselves through growth and wear. Below the surface, a family may be storing winter branches near a hidden entrance. Water slowed by their dam is entering soil, carrying sediment, and creating habitat that can persist after the builders leave. The same animal has shaped trade routes, tested modern roads, supported restoration projects, and entered warming tundra. Its importance grows from a practical act repeated across generations. A beaver seeks enough water for food, shelter, and safe movement. In doing so, it changes the conditions under which everything nearby must live.